ISIS is on the move in the Middle East, but it's moving much more quickly than you might think. Let's talk about it. And to talk with us today, Avi Lipkin. Avi, it's always just great to have you back.
I'm so happy to be back with you and in your new facility.
In our new facility, and by the way, we need to give you the full tour when we're through today because the Lord has blessed us greatly.
Amen.
And we're going to talk about something today that I consider extremely important. Your new book, it's called Islamic Rivalry, talks about this convoluted, crazy situation that's going on in the Middle East. People read the papers, they watch cable news, they watch for some sign that will give them some understanding about what's going on, but it's a hard thing to understand. Let's talk about ISIS, and let's talk about what's happening in the Middle East, because that's what your book is all about.
Yes, indeed. Firstly, I did want to say that we had the Arab Spring breaking out, the so-called Arab Spring, in February of 2011. And people were asking me, when are you going to write a book about the Arab Spring? From the Arab Spring, this blossomed, excuse the euphemism, positive expression, this eventually blossomed into ISIS. And I'm very happy that I was able to write this seventh book because it is the culmination of my first 6 books and all the 66 years of my life and experience and my wife's experiences all coming together now in this perfect storm.
And I have to say, going into our talk today, that I have read all of Avi's books and have talked with him over the years. And this particular book, which by the way, has a kind of a medieval looking cover on it. It's called Islamic Rivalry. This particular book, I think, has more of your personal insight than I've ever seen before. You hear the real Avi Lipkin speaking when you read this book.
Well, indeed. I come from parents who were raised in Argentina. And because my parents were raised in Argentina, even though I was born in New York and raised in New York, Spain was the mother country in our house, the Spanish culture. And Spanish culture involves 760 years of wars with Islam. My BA at Hebrew University was Spanish studies, but my major was Sovietology, Russian studies. The Russians have a history of 1,000 years of war with Islam. And so this new book brings together all of my life experiences and all the education that I received to understand a multi-front, multi-century war between Islam and Christian civilization. I extend that now to say Judeo-Christian Western civilization. But the war is a war between Sunnis and Shiites, a war of 1,400 years. ISIS is Sunni. Iran is Shiite, and they're leading the war primarily against these ISIS people. This is a major war which I believe will lead to the defeat of Shiite Islam and the preeminence of Sunni Islam through ISIS. The problem is ISIS then goes wild, kills the king of Saudi Arabia, kills the king of Jordan, kills the royal families, blows up the Kaaba. ISIS has said it will blow up the Kaaba in Mecca, which means the end of Islam. Well, and they'll blow up the oil wells.
As I understand it, you have to make pilgrimage once in your lifetime at least to the Kaaba.
The Hajj, which is known in English as the pilgrimage, means to go around in circles 7 times around the Black Stone. If the Black Stone is gone, the Hajj, which is one of the 5 pillars of Islam, is taken out. They will not have where to pray if this thing gets blown up. I think it's ironic because many people understand that at the heart of Islam is the Black Stone, and if you take out the Black Stone, you basically terminate Islam.
Now let's talk about what really moved me about your book, and that is the last 100 years or so of this ongoing conflict. You go back to 1916, the Sykes-Picot Treaty, when England and France and Russia kind of drew the boundaries, and they drew artificial boundaries in the Middle East. The old Ottoman Empire died, and oil began to flow, British petroleum and so forth and so on. We've talked about this before, but bubbling underneath the surface all these years, you have people who are dedicated to restoring an Arabic empire. How are they looking at doing this? And and what can we see as Westerners that will give us a clue as to what's going on?
Well, the Islamic faith is that Allah, the God of Islam, has blessed them with oil revenues. The money is squandered very often in profligate living and weapons purchases, which are not good for the people. But the idea is that Islam must have the victory over Christianity because Allah has given this oil money for that purpose. So the Islamic approach for the last 100 years has been to use the West to achieve the funds, then use the funds basically to take over the West. And this is what we've been seeing since World War II primarily, since 1929 when Saudi Arabia first struck oil. Mm-hmm. And what the Saudis are doing is the Saudis, have been funding the Muslim Brotherhood, and the Muslim Brotherhood eventually flowers into what we call today ISIS or Al-Qaeda or Bajat al-Nusra or Khorasan. They have all these names. They're all terrorist organizations funded and created and dreamed by Saudi Arabia. But whoever sows a wind reaps a whirlwind, and these people are going to come home to roost and will kill the king of Saudi Arabia and the king of Jordan, who they see as traitors and collaborators by working with the West and corrupt people. So 92% of the Saudi people support ISIS. 82% overall of Muslims in the Al Jazeera poll recently said that they support ISIS.
Good night. That's amazing. So ISIS is definitely on the ascent.
Yes.
And ISIS has designs on essentially establishing control on the entire Middle East, going up to the border of Israel, I suppose, up to the Jordan River. And do they have a chance of achieving their goal?
According to Haifa University professor Amatzia Baram, Jordan is in great danger of succumbing to ISIS because the vast majority of Jordanians are very, very devout Muslims. And if you're a devout Muslim, why would you not support ISIS?
We have an ally, supposedly, in Jordan, King Abdullah.
Right.
And very much westernized, sometimes dresses in three-piece suits, and speaks almost with an American accent. And we've always thought of Jordan as being very pro-Western. What would happen if his regime fell?
Well, we saw what happened to Mubarak in Egypt after 30 years. We saw what happened to Ben Ali in Algeria. We saw what happened to Gaddafi in Libya. We saw what happened to Saleh in Yemen. There's a very massive overthrow of what we call Western or secular. I don't want to say liberal. They're not liberals. They're dictators, but they are westernized. Like the Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran was overthrown because he was a dictator. Jimmy Carter didn't like him. The fact that he was the cornerstone of American policy in the Cold War with Russia made no difference. And Jimmy Carter said, oh, we're going to bring in Khomeini because he's a man of God. And one of the most stupidest things that people say in America, including leaders in both parties, is that Allah and God are the same. Well, they're not the same because Allah wants to kill everybody, and the God of the Jews and Christians wants everyone to live. So there's a very clear opposite here. So the king of Jordan is descended from the Prophet Muhammad. He has a responsibility to that genealogy, that lineage. But in spite of it, he is a Westerner, he is logical, he does understand that Israel is his best friend, and Israel very often has come to the defense of Jordan, of King Hussein, his father. If you remember in 1970 when the Syrians invaded Jordan from the north. Yes. And Israel said that they would go to war to defend Jordan. Jordan really has no friend other than Israel. So I believe that, as Amatzia Baram said, there are very strong pockets in the Jordanian population that will immediately go over to ISIS and the kingdom will collapse.
Now, let's go back a bit, and I was really impressed in the way you linked oil and the flow of oil with Middle Eastern politics down through the years. Going all the way back to the Holocaust, even the Holocaust seemed to have some connection to the flow of oil out of the Middle East. Talk about that a minute.
Well, indeed, in the good old days, America had plenty of oil. I'll never forget, I love to come to Oklahoma and Texas, and I see the pictures from 100 years ago with the oil fields, and America is so blessed.
Yes.
But the problem was, with the rise of the Nazi war machine in the 1930s, Germany does not have oil. And one of their great prizes, actually, was the oil of the Ploiești oil fields in Romania, and that kind of helped the German army along in their war with Russia. But they really needed the oil of Arabia. And that was the significance of the Battle of El Alamein in Egypt between Montgomery and Rommel. And so when the Germans were defeated, that was like the last straw that broke the German war machine. We knew the war was over then because they could not get to that oil in Iraq and in Saudi Arabia. It wasn't so much that America needed the Saudi oil in World War II, it was to prevent the oil from falling into the hands of the Nazis. Of course, after World War II, there was a Cold War between the Soviets and the West. So the United States always had to be close to the Saudi kings and Saudi leaderships to maintain how shall I say, an advantage over the Russians. And it worked. And so to this day, America has chosen under all administrations to maintain a very strong alliance with Saudi Arabia.
You know, in one of your previous books entitled Return to Mecca, you write about the Kaaba that we were talking about a minute ago, and the incredible force that it has on Islam as a whole. It's kind of the big drawing card in Islam. And it blows me away still to think that ISIS might want to destroy that as a pagan shrine. Let's talk more about that. Help me to understand how in the world ISIS could want to destroy. It seems to me that if they did destroy the Kaaba and all the surrounding buildings and so forth, the institution, that they would actually be destroying Islam. What's going on here?
Well, I don't know if you remember, there was a politician in Colorado by the name of Tom Tancredo. Yes. And right after 9/11, I think that the next day, he came out with a statement. He was still in Congress at the time. After that, he lost the elections after what he said. But he said, if there are any more 9/11 attacks on American soil, that black stone should be nuked. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that, but he said that. And there are a lot of people in top levels in the U.S. military that understand that when you destroy the Kaaba, you cut the head off the snake. The Kaaba is at the heart of Islam. I would also say something that could get me into a lot of trouble theologically with my own fellow Jews, and that is that the phylacteries that the Jewish people wear, and I explain this in my book and in my DVDs on this subject, the phylacteries, I say, are a replica of the black stone. When Moses, and I explain this in my yellow book in the Return to Mecca, Moses comes to Pharaoh, and there's a mistranslation from the Hebrew to the English. Even in the Jewish translations, it's still the wrong translation. Moses says to Pharaoh, let my people go so that they may celebrate the Lord in the desert. But the word in Hebrew is sheyahogu. The word hog comes from the word hag, which is a holiday. Holiday originates from the word hajj, which is to go around in circles around the black stone. And what I do is I take the literal interpretation of the words from the original Hebrew, and I show that we were there in Arabia for 38 years when we left Egypt. And Jethro, his name in Arabic is Yathrib. Yathrib is one of the names of Medina. In other words, there was no city of Mecca. There was just a black stone in the middle of the desert. The people went on pilgrimage 3 days in the desert. Moses also says to Pharaoh, 3 days in the desert. That's from Medina to Mecca. So these are the things I explain in my book. So why did Osama bin Laden say we have to kill Israel and the Jews? Because they're going to take Mecca and Medina, which they claim is theirs. Because the Muslims know something that evidently the rabbis don't know and don't want to know.
But back to ISIL, or ISIS, I suppose those terms are interchangeable. Why in the world would they want to do away with that shrine?
Because they claim it's pagan.
It's pagan.
It's pagan. And you have to remember that when the Israelites were there 3,500 years ago, and this is 2,000 years before Islam. So Islam is created by Muhammad, and he co-opts the black stone, the Kaaba, into Islam. And so basically, ISIS people are saying that Muhammad sullied Islam by incorporating pagan black stone.
Now, one of the things we see ISIS doing all the time, when they take a territory, they will destroy all the antiquities there, the ancient Roman aqueducts, the remains of Roman temples, archaeological sites that just level them to the ground. saying that anything prior to the revelations of Muhammad is null and void, and therefore let's just get rid of it. And would that apply then to the Kaaba as well? It's in the same category?
The answer is yes. And I would even add something else, that there are places in Saudi Arabia today, graves, supposedly, it could be true also, graves of ancient Arab people and early followers of Muhammad that have become revered. And the Saudi government is destroying those places.
Wow. It's an amazing world in which we live. Avi Lipkin writes in Islamic Rivalry, ISIS and Iran are fighting for the heart of Islamic identity. Let's talk about Islamic identity. What is this big fight that's going on? I'm not sure we in the West have a grasp of this identity you're talking about.
Yes, well, after the death of Muhammad, there were three caliphs. You had Al-Bakr, you had Omar, and you had Uthman. And the fourth caliph, this is where the problem starts. The fourth caliph was Ali. And Ali was a first cousin of Muhammad. And he, as a tradition is in the Middle East, he married the daughter of Muhammad, Fatima. And they had children, including Hassan and Hussein. You hear Hassan Hussein, Hassan Hussein. These names are some of the grandchildren of Muhammad. And they established a lineage, a bloodline. And you have to understand that by the time of the fourth caliph, the Arabs had conquered so much of the world. They had so much territory, so much wealth, so many slaves and spices and gold and silver. And it's like mafia fighting over the spoils. So the first three caliphs are the Sunnis, the fathers of the Sunnis. The fourth caliph is the father of the Shiites. And that's all it is. It's not really something about theology. The Shiites versus the Sunnis is like a turf war in the mafia over which mafia family is going to control the wealth.
A turf war. Never heard it described that way before, but that's anything but religious in my view. Although the mafia, in some ways, claims to be religious. That is, they have their religious connections and their religious ideas. So I mean, maybe that's not stretching things too much to say that ISIS/ISIL is kind of like gang rivalry with a religious side piece.
Also, Muhammad had a dream before his death that his camp, in other words, the Muslim followers, would be divided into two. One of the camps would go to heaven, and one of the camps would go to hell. He didn't know which was which, and there was no Shiite-Sunni rift at that time. But the Shiites and the Sunnis quote this dream all the time to show that they're the ones who are going to heaven, the other side's going to hell.
They believe in heaven and hell, at least.
Yes, well, obviously they know what hell is, and that's the hell fire. And of course, heaven is 72 virgins, which I think would be hell.
Well, that's another story. Let's talk for a moment about America, and we talk about this all the time. Speaking from the prophetic perspective, the Christian prophetic perspective, America is falling away from a really deep belief and commitment to Christianity. And we're becoming secularized. And we think that everything can be solved with the liberal application of money, politics. It's all going to be okay if we just do the right thing at the right time. ISIS, they're not driven by that. They are driven by belief in Allah.
Right.
They really believe he's behind them all the way. He's going to take them to total victory. There is a zealotry there that defies imagination almost. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Well, indeed, for Westerners, money is the objective.
Yes.
For ISIS, money is the tool to get to the objective,
Okay.
which is the imposition of Islam all over the world. Now, one thing I wanted to share, and this predates Islam by 30 years. My wife, Rachel, who you know, and most of the viewers know, my wife, Rachel, is an intelligence gatherer for the Israeli government. She monitors the radio and TV broadcasts. And she's been working at this for 30 years. 30 years ago, my wife picked up broadcasts in Arabic where the Islamic world was saying, now listen to this is completely crazy. They said, Even if it takes us 150 years, we're going to make America a Muslim country.
Okay.
That was 30 years ago.
30 years ago.
And my wife thought these people were delusional. How can you make the greatest Christian country on earth a Muslim country? Now Rachel picks up the broadcast 30 years later, and the same radio stations say, we thought it was going to take 150 years. We were wrong. It's only going to take us 30 years to make America a Muslim country. Now, if America becomes a Muslim country, God forbid, falling away from Christianity, then the rest of the world falls like dominoes to Islam. So Israel is not what interests them. What interests them is the primary and ultimate target, the good old USA. And instead of being a Christian country, it has to become a Muslim country. And this is one of the reasons why there is such a massive financial takeover of banks, corporations, oil companies, media, politicians, of all political parties.
That account for what a lot of us are watching right now, and that is the Islamization of America in places of finance, for example, in the State Department, in the War Department, the Pentagon. It seems to be becoming, in some ways, more pro-Islamic all the time. That is, willing to take the Islamic position and willing to bargain and make deals, shall we say.
Well, very clearly, if the objective is cash, mammon, capitalism, and you're not talking about God, if God doesn't interest you, the only thing that interests you is money and oil and economic stability. So you appoint Muslims to all these key positions because that's going to mean money in your pocket.
I'm reading Zechariah 12:2. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. You know, it almost seems like that's happening right now. There's a sort of a siege mentality, if you will, on their part.
Well, the world seems to be getting ready to gang up on Israel and to force Israel to accept a Palestinian state along the borders of June 5th, 1967, which is something Israel cannot do, because then those borders would be indefensible and Israel would be committing suicide. So as far as complaints about my own leadership in Israel, I got plenty of complaints, but my leadership is not suicidal.
I want to read from the cover notes on Avi's new book, Islamic Rivalry. What it would mean, he writes, if Mecca and Medina were no longer under Islamic control. What would it mean? In his 6 previous books, Avi dealt with the fact that Islam remains the primary threat to the entire world. In this book, he explains how we must, quote unquote, capture the flag. What would it mean if Mecca and Medina were no longer under Islamic control?
It would mean the end of Islam. The end of Islam means that 1.5 billion Muslims would now have a life. In other words, German people are not bad people, but Nazis are. In 1945, the Allies rebuilt Germany and basically ramrodded democracy down the throats of the German people, but to do that, Nazism had to be banned. Same with Japan. You remember the word kamikaze, suicider?
Yes, sure.
This is not Islamic, this is Japanese. Do you see Japanese blowing themselves up today? Japanese today are great people. The old people are great people if they have the right system. And that's thanks to General Douglas MacArthur, who rebuilt Japan and ramrodded baseball and democracy down their throats. The Japanese are great people today. And it's interesting that Germany and Japan, the terrible enemies of World War II, are the best allies of the West today.
And you're saying that that same change could take place in Islam?
It has to. It has to.
Wow.
It has to. You know, I'm Jewish, but when I'm in Christian churches, I say, bring them to the Lord, or they will bring you to the sword. Because our God is the Lord. Their God is the sword. And our God doesn't want our death. Our God wants our life and our repentance, wants us to live. Their God wants our death.
We read about ISIS in the news, the beheadings, the absolutely fanatic behavior. And we think, well, that doesn't really involve me. It's across the ocean, you know, and I guess I'll just go to the grocery store and live life as usual. But what you're telling me is that we're target number one for those people.
What I've been saying for the last 26 years is that there are 2 types of Islam. There is what we call the revolutionary Islam, which is 9/11, And then there is the evolutionary Islam, which is the Saudi and Qatari and other Islamic countries' plan to use their oil finances to buy America out over a period of many decades, which we see happening. The Islamization of America is a peaceful Islamization of America. What I wanted to focus on now was ISIS, which is not peaceful. And ISIS even views the Saudi leadership as heretic and collaborators with the Christian West, deserving death. The Saudi leadership should not be doing business with the Christian West. Now, 9/11 was something that my wife, not that she predicted, she listens to the Arabs, and they were saying that after 1993, the first attack on the World Trade Center.
By the way, let me just interject that Avi's wife grew up in Egypt and speaks Arab fluently, and is charged by the Israeli government with listening to Arabic communications, radio, television, I suppose, and sort of reporting on what they're talking about, right?
Right, and for many years before, and in my first book is Fanatic Islam, A Global Threat, which came out in 1997, 4 years before 9/11, I was focusing on the plans of Islam for a second attack on the World Trade Center, which was with aircraft. And many PC, politically correct people in America were saying, oh, you shouldn't say these things. The Arabs are good people. The Muslims are good people. Yes, the Arabs are good people. Muslims are good people. But some of them want to destroy the World Trade Center. And if at first you don't succeed, try again. So what my wife has been doing and what I have been doing is to monitor the broadcast, to monitor their activities. And there are revolutionaries who do not like what the evolutionary leaders are doing to try to be chummy with the American leadership and to try to take over the United States through the buyout. And the approach of the revolutionaries is what was created crooked, in other words, Christianity, in their opinion, was created crooked, must be destroyed. It cannot be straightened out. And so what I'm watching is the ISIS plans and other plans of other Islamic groups to infiltrate the United States through the Canadian borders, through the Mexican borders, through jet charter flights. Because Muslims, illegal Muslims, are being flown into this country every day by jet charter flights paid for by the U.S. taxpayer.
And it's as easy as can be to charter a jet somewhere and fly in here and just slip into the population at large.
And many of these so-called refugees are actually ISIS operatives. In fact, they say, for example, that we're going to destroy the Vatican. We're going to destroy Rome. And what you have today is thousands and thousands of Syrians, ISIS, thousands of Somalis, thousands of Libyans taking boats across the Mediterranean, getting picked up by the Italian Navy, given asylum, and they're all getting, they say they're going to do it, that they're going to take the Vatican and blow it up and destroy it, because the Vatican, for the Islamic world, is the religious enemy. America is the political enemy.
In their literature, I see ISIS condemning what they call Rome. Capital R, capital O, capital M, capital E is a huge, if you will, target for them. They talk about Rome like I would talk about a mission that I might want to carry out, and I'm going to get there and I'm going to do that thing. ISIS speaks the same way about Rome. We're going to get there, we're going to destroy Rome. Why Rome?
Well, because out of the 2 billion Christians on the face of the earth, 1.2 billion are estimated to be Catholics. In other words, they're the biggest Christian denomination. America is the biggest Christian country. Those are the targets and the crosshairs of the Islamic revolutionary agenda.
Let's talk about America now. America, I think by any measure, is fast asleep. I heard one man say a while back that the Americans are sound asleep and dreaming that they're wide awake. And that's kind of our situation here. Business as usual, and yet we are being infiltrated. I think Islamic Rivalry, your new book, points this out in pretty good detail. And by the way, we're going to be talking more about this book. This is Avi's 7th book.
Right.
And by the way, the most personal, the most dynamic, the most, there's more Avi in this book than I've ever seen before. He really puts himself on paper. and it's a good read. It's called Islamic Rivalry. The subhead is ISIS and Iran are fighting for the heart of Islamic identity. They're serious. They're here.
You know what? I'll tell you something. ISIS is Sunni. Iran is Shiite. And this is a fight to the death. This is 1,400 years of internecine war, which will never end until either one side or both sides are dead. They're killing each other. It's not like the Protestants and the Catholics who had a war of 300 years, and praise God, the war is over. Catholics and Protestants are brothers today. The problem here with the Iranians and the ISIS is they have their sleeper cells on American soil.
Now, you started writing about this years ago, before we even heard about ISIS.
Right.
About the fact that there were sleeper cells in
Yes.
the
So the Iranian and Shiite sleeper cells say, if America supports ISIS, we're going to carry out terrorist attacks on American soil. ISIS says, if America supports Iran and the Shiites, we will carry out terrorist attacks on American soil. So it's kind of like America is in a double checkmate by the two different Islamic streams, Shiite and Sunni. These Islamic streams do not like the idea of a strong Christian America, and it's one of the reasons why Christianity is being suppressed, and Americans are told to go back to sleep, just keep working, ignore the threat like an ostrich sticking its head in the sand, and the threat will go away.
Now let's talk about what has led up to the present moment. Let's go back really to the beginning of the 20th century, move up through World Wars I, World War II, up to the 67 Six-Day War. All of these things, the foundation of the PLO in the early 1980s and on up to today. What in the world? How can we, as Americans, understand what's going on, and what should we be doing about it?
Well, if you look at the recent history of the last 100 years of the Islamic world, you take, for example, the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And the great Turkish leader, Kemal Atatürk, wanted to secularize Turkey, westernize Turkey, modernize Turkey. He put chains on the doors of the mosques. He suppressed Islam, adopted a Latin script. And for decades, Turkey was a member of NATO and considered pretty much a Western country. It was Muslim, but they kind of suppressed Islam. Iran, same thing. The Shah of Iran chained the doors of the mosques shut, exiled the Ayatollahs to France, and westernized and modernized Iran, so much so that Iran was an ally of Israel, Iran was an ally of the United States, and was a cornerstone in the war against Soviet Russia. So you had these anti-Islamic leaders. They're Muslims, but they were anti-Islamic. Countries like Egypt and Libya and Algeria and Tunisia and Yemen and Iraq and Iran and Iraq, these countries under Saddam Hussein were anti-Islamic. And the fanatic Muslims were suppressed severely. The Muslim Brotherhood was outlawed in Egypt, except for 1 or 2 years, since 1929. So the leaderships were dictatorial. They were Muslim by faith, but they were not Islamic regimes.
So what happened? The Muslim Brotherhood is rising in power. ISIS is rising in power. What in the world happened?
It's called the soup kitchen. The Saudis invested tremendous amounts of money in Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, in Turkey, and give this a few generations, you have new generations of young people, and these families are having many children, and the percentages, the proportion of the population which becomes fanatically Muslim because they have been fed in the soup kitchens of the mosques. The people who are hungry, bring your hungry, bring your poor, we shall feed them. This was paid for by Saudis, meaning it was paid for by American cash for Saudi oil.
Let me do a quick change of subject right quick. And I want to go back to 1947-48, the foundation of the State of Israel. When I think of Israel, I think of a biblical miracle.
Right.
A miracle of God. And the fulfillment of certain biblical prophecy that said that the Jews would return to the land and that they would, the desert would blossom as a rose. And you've heard all this 1,000 times. And we in the West root for Israel. We cheer for Israel, I want to tell you, and we still are. And we're a little bit afraid now. Is Israel going to catch it? Is Israel going to actually be able to remain tenable? What's going to happen there?
Well, I believe that ISIS will take Jordan. We will see the black flags of ISIS along the Jordan River, which will prompt Israel to defend itself. Israel has no choice but to defend itself. In American history, there's a term manifest destiny.
Yes.
And Israel will be seeing manifest destiny. And with your permission, I wanted to talk about David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel. I was 15 years old in America, and I had a Hebrew teacher, and he helped me to write to David Ben-Gurion. I was 15, this is in 1964.
Wow.
And this is the first letter. And he says here, that, and I have the translation on the back in English, and Ben-Gurion says, the Jews will not survive in the diaspora because of intermarriage. And we see that happening. Today, out of every 100 Jews in America, 80 marry Christians. And I'm not saying it's bad to marry Christians. We have the same God, the same Bible, Messiah is a Jew. And I think there's a bottom line also, because when ISIS comes to America to slaughter the Jews, which is imminent, the Jews are going to have to flee to Israel with their Christian spouses and children. That's why I'm forming a Judeo-Christian political party, which is covered in my book, The Bible Block, from 10 years ago, but now it's coming to fruition. The party will be registered very imminently. So Ben-Gurion says, if you don't move to Israel, you're not a Jew, your children will not be Jewish, and definitely your grandchildren will not be Jewish because they will be Christian. In this letter, he says, Israel will not survive unless it doubles and triples its population. That was when Israel was 3 million. Today, Israel is 6 million Jews and 500,000 Christians. I predict when ISIS goes into action at the call of jihad in America, Canada, and the diasporas, we will see a tsunami of 10 million Jews and Christians moving to the land of Israel. Now, when ISIS attacks Israel from Jordan and from Syria, and Israel has to defend itself, Israel's borders will not shrink back to the borders of 1967. Israel's borders will expand eastward. And in fact, today, because of the imminent slaughter of the Druze in the south of Syria, there are calls by many people, including Druze in Israel, to go and defend their brethren and extend the umbrella of protection of the Israeli military to the Druze, Jebel Druze, which is south of Syria, and to the Kurds in the north. And I believe eventually what will happen is our borders will expand to the Deuteronomy 11 borders, and the population of Jews and Christians will increase in the land of Israel, because when a Jew flees to Israel, he or she will have to take the Christian spouse and children with them.
Now, my reaction to that, as I was listening to Avi, was, well, wait a minute. We're seeing exactly the opposite thing happen in Israel. There was just a decision in the last few days that no longer can your passport say that you were born in Israel. It has to say you were born in Jerusalem, because there is no such place as Israel. It's not a legitimate state. And the Palestinians seem to be gaining in power and control, and there seems to be more and more of a movement in Israel to move Israel back to the pre-1967 borders. And we keep hearing in the news that Israel is going to shrink and shrink and shrink, and eventually be dwindled down to practically nothing. And you're saying precisely the opposite thing.
God will reshuffle the deck. You know, Hillary Clinton, I shouldn't be mentioning names, but she was Secretary of State, and all the secretaries of state before her were constantly attacking Israel. This is a tradition going back to '67. The U.S. Congress is 80% pro-Israel. The military is pro-Israel. The American people are pro-Israel.
Yes.
But the State Department and the White House over the last 40, 50 years has been anti-Israel. And all of a sudden, in February of 2011, a Tunisian fruit vendor self-immolates, starting the Arab Spring, and the whole Middle East collapses. And everyone was searching in the State Department on how to blame Israel. And Israel had nothing to do with it. It was God who reshuffled the deck. And then just a year ago, all of a sudden, ISIS appears. Again, everyone's trying to crush Israel, shrink Israel down. ISIS appears, and ISIS is part of God's plan for Israel's eventual expansion to borders that God promised in the Bible.
Now, I like that. I like hearing that, because you haven't given up. You don't have a dark view of the future.
Not at all. And not only that, Israel will be the safest place on earth, safer than the United States. When all these terrorist attacks begin, it will be safer in Israel. And so for all of the people, and you just came to Israel with our Lipkin tours, you saw how safe it was, how nice it was. And I recommend to all your viewers, please come to Israel, see with your own eyes. We prove the veracity of the Bible. And if you prove the veracity of the Bible by going to these places, Bethel and Shiloh and other places, you prove God's existence. And if God exists, then why should we be concerned?
You know, as an aside, on that recent trip to Israel, one of the things that really impressed me was the number of people from around the world that you see all at the same time. You can stand in the old city in one spot and hear 15 different languages being spoken.
Correct.
There are people from everywhere, and I stopped and watched this, and I said, why are all these people coming here to this place?
Israel is the apple of God's eye.
I think they know there's something there, and they're trying to find out what it is. I think that's what's going on.
I think the people in the group that came with you found what they were looking for.
Yeah, it was a good trip,
Yeah.
and we appreciated it. So you have a positive view, and this is wonderful for me because I read the news, and the more I read the news, the more negative my view. We're seeing a degeneration of society in America. We're seeing the administration progressively moving away from the longstanding ties we've had with Israel. We're seeing our military, our State Department moving more and more in an Arabist direction. And yet you're standing right there and saying, no, this is all going to go forward in a positive way. I like to hear that.
Well, I think that history is like a pendulum. You know, pendulum swings to the right, swings to the left. Yeah. And the pendulum has swung as far as it could go to the left. And I see the move of God in America. I see the people. I go to the churches. I've been in 1,000 churches. And I can feel that the pendulum is swinging back to the right, swinging back to God's purposes. And that includes loving Israel, supporting Israel, loving America, and standing for what America always really meant and stood for. Alexis de Tocqueville said, America will be the greatest country on earth because the American people are good people and their pulpits are on fire for the Lord. Conversely, when America's pulpits are no longer on fire for the Lord, America loses its preeminence. And that's what we have to prevent. We cannot allow America to lose its preeminence.
Now, back to the dark side for a moment, because I really want to flesh out what you're talking about in Islamic rivalry, and that we have porous borders in America. The southern border, thousands of people are coming across unchecked. A lot of them are people from the Middle East. A lot of them would be terrorists. You've written about that in your previous books. This is, I think, a developing threat, and yet you're still taking a bright view of this whole thing. What's going to happen? How would you lay out the next, say, 18 calendar months?
Let me say a negative thing. The negative thing is I believe there will be tremendous jihadist attacks on American soil. It's imminent. There will be tremendous upheavals in Europe. I think the outcome of this will be like a slap in the face, waking people up, waking up governments. You know, there was a mayor in France, for example, who said Islam should be banned in France. You have a country in Africa called Angola. Angola just came out with a law banning Islam in Angola. You know, Japan bans Islam. There is no Islam in Japan. There are some Muslims who come with special permission, but we will be seeing increasingly Islam being banned because it doesn't make sense to allow a system in your country that is calling for the death of everybody. So people are asleep because the agenda believes if people are asleep and keep working as normal, then the economy goes on. And the only thing that matters is the economy because these people don't have God. But I think God has a plan, he has a purpose, and I think that in the end the pendulum swings back in the right direction. And I believe America will be restored as a Christian country.
Avi's book, Islamic Rivalry, ISIS and Iran, Fighting for the Heart of Islamic Identity. I suppose that's a bright side from my perspective, because if the enemy is fighting against itself, that's always good for me.
I would recommend to the viewers to read 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Read the whole chapter. And it's an unbelievable story of 3 armies that besieged Jerusalem. And the Israelites inside of the city knew that they had no defense against these 3 armies. They were the armies of Ammon, which is today Amman, Moab and Seir. Seir is Arabia. And these three armies came to destroy Israel and kill all the Jews. And King Jehoshaphat said to the people, go to the temple in Jerusalem, go to the heart of Jerusalem, prostrate, pray to God before the high priest, and God will give us his answer of salvation. The next morning, they opened the gates of the city, and the three armies killed each other and died of the plague.
Wow.
Which is what we see happening today. The Bible repeats itself again and again. And today, I heard for human beings dying, but the Shiite system is horrible and the Sunni system is horrible, and they're all fighting each other.
And as I read the Bible, I read time and time and time again of stories about a besieged Israel becoming victorious, absolutely victorious, when there is no possibility for victory. In other words, miraculous victories, one way or another.
Well, if there were a possibility for victory, then we would claim the credit. But when there is no possibility for victory, God gets the credit.
Does I wasn't even going to ask this question, but it suddenly occurred to me, does the Israeli mentality have some kind of almost a supernatural positive attitude about the future in spite of all of these things?
I believe that Israel is the 8th happiest country in the world. In other words, they checked 150 countries to see are the people happy. Israel's the 8th happiest country.
I wonder where we would fall on that scale.
I think America was 31 or something out of 150. I think Finland was number 1 and Denmark and...
I talked to Jews in Israel while we were there, and they all have this vision, this purposeful idea that every Jew should have his family, he should have his domicile, and he should have his own vineyard. In other words, settle in, live normally, live productively, live happily. That's sort of the Israeli dream, to have you...
And go to the mall.
Go to the mall.
We have nice malls in Israel.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is no sense of defeat there at all. There's no sense of impending doom. And that's biblical as far as I'm concerned. Now, I don't know what the Jews would say. They would say, well, this is just the way we live. But from my perspective as a Christian across the ocean, God time and time again promises victory to the Israeli army in the latter days. I think of Zechariah 12, where the Israeli army just becomes supernaturally efficient, and the enemy just rolls away in flames. And you see this imagery time and time and time again.
It was in the Bible, 2 Chronicles chapter 20.
Yeah. Miraculous victory. Islamic Rivalry is the name of the book, Avi Lipkin's latest, and by the way, his most personal and passionate book. I think he lays it all out here. We have offered his first 6 books for years here, and this is the one called Return to Mecca, which is not quite my favorite. Islam Prophesied in Genesis is maybe my favorite book of yours, but these last 2 books talk about things that nobody else is talking about. You are cutting edge in your thinking, I believe. Then the first 4 books is Fanatic Islam, a Global Threat, Israel's Bible Block, this one, Islamic Threat Updates, and this one, Christian Revival for Israel's Survival. I love the thought in that one. These 6 books we're still offering as the Avi Lipkin package right now for $79.95. Check prophecywatchers.com, the online bookstore, and you'll find the Avi Lipkin package, these 6 books for $79.95 with a bonus. Avi's brand new book, the 7th book, included in that package, absolutely free. Just order the Avi Lipkin package. And by the way, if you want to have Islamic Rivalry by itself alone, we're offering it at the online bookstore for $19.95. Check prophecywatchers.com, the online bookstore, and you'll go right to these offerings. Islamic Rivalry. We're down to a couple of minutes, Avi. What do you want to leave people with today? From the book, from your heart, what would you have us to know about you, your plans, Israel? What's going to happen? What should we be looking for?
Well, like I said before, I predict terrorist attacks. Everything is just fine, and then one morning we wake up and things are happening. I believe that Jewish people and their Christian spouses are going to have to be picking up and moving to Israel. I'm forming a Judeo-Christian political party to represent these, I estimate, 5 to 10 million immigrants. Israel will, as Ben-Gurion said in his letters, maybe we should offer the letters as a bonus. Ben-Gurion said Israel's population will double and triple. Now, that was when we were 3 million. Today we're 6 million. It already has doubled. But I predict it will double and triple above and beyond that. And the political party that I'm forming, which is covered in my 4th book, Israel's Bible Block, talks about a Western civilization political party that will bring what America originally was all about to Israel. And that the Christians will have full representation in the Knesset, which they don't have today. And I will build an infrastructure in the new Israel, which will bring jobs to the millions of people that are coming to Israel, as well as those who are already there. Israel's population, Israel's economy is growing and growing and growing, in spite of all the pressures. The more America tries, not America, the more the world tries to bring in the BDS, boycott, disinvestment, and sanctions, Israel's economy is growing in spite of it even more and more and more. And so I see a homecoming, tremendous homecoming of millions of Jews and Christians to the land of Israel. And Jerusalem is the apple of God's eye for the Jews and the Christians and for the Messiah.
And it says in Psalm 122, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And don't forget to do that. Pray for Avi on his travels. This man travels like nobody you've ever known in your entire life. He's constantly on the road. He's speaking. He's doing all kinds of events. And so pray for his health and that he'll be carried along by the strength of the Lord. And Avi, we do pray for you. Thank you very much for talking with us today. And may the Lord bless you and yours.
And God save America and bless you and yours.
Amen. I'm Gary Stearman. Keep watching, everybody. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com or follow us at facebook.com/prophecywatchers. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody, and we'll see you soon.